I really did not want to evade the question about how old I am, but I did say I was 101. Just because I wanted you to look at me and say, boy, he looks really good for 101. I thought he was only like 78. But if I told you I was 58, which is what the fact is, you'd probably think, oh, okay, right? You're looking kind of old there, buddy boy. So anyway, but yeah, that's kind of what life is all about. And so I want to talk today about life, not necessarily because today's my birthday, but you kind of reflect on life sometimes from the very beginning. And there is this connection, as what was just read today. There's different stages even in the Christian life. I don't think necessarily John, as he's writing this letter, is writing to people necessarily of physical age, but maybe spiritual age. Remember, we talked about some of the children, the young people, and then the older people, the fathers. And so there is this growth and this maturity. And it's always good for us maybe even to look at ourselves to say, where am I on this scale? Am I really maturing? Because there's nothing quite as awkward as, meeting somebody that is actually, in a physical sense, maybe about 40 years old, but as far as his ability to connect with people and to be able to get along, he's about 8.5, right? It just doesn't go very well because we expect, the natural way and the normal way, God's plan, that we would mature in every area of our life. Now we know that doesn't always happen. Some people don't mature physically, and because they've got some problems, some health problems, some genetic there's all kinds of things. Or maybe even mentally people don't always, mature. But we don't say, well, that's wonderful. We wish everybody was like that. We try to work with it. We try to, bless those people and serve those people. We don't look down on them because, what would we say? Well, it's no fault of their own. But we know some people, it's kind of this is maybe a decision you've made, to stay in your little happy place at 6.5, right? And now you're married with children. It's like that's a scary place to be, right? So we want to see maturity. So what we want to do today is talk about, we're going to start at the very beginning. So we talk about this rebirth because we're talking about the physical, spiritual life that we have. And sometimes it is described in a very similar way that we see life happening. And so it's going to be fairly basic and fairly generic, but it's also helpful for us to see how this all really comes about. And so we know kind of at the very beginning how life starts, and so we don't need a lot of detail, but even spiritually, we see that, there's a connection. And really what it is, a connection between God and us, with his spirit and our spirit as we are learning. Jesus talked about the parable of the seed, and of course, we know that even physical life, there is a seed, and then there's also an egg. There's somewhere that the seed has to attach to get into, and so in the ground, we plant a seed in the earth. We know that generally when you plant seeds, like in a bowl with no dirt and no water, it doesn't really grow very well. You don't really get a big plant. It's got to get into something, and that happens physically, but it also happens spiritually. And of course, in this parable, Jesus tells we have to have the type of soil that is able to receive the seed. Spiritually, we have to have the kind of heart that receives the seed, because he's saying here there's some kinds of hearts that don't allow the seed to penetrate. It doesn't get in there. And so we've got to allow God to come into us. And that's why there's a lot of people today, they have a hard heart, or they have a doubting heart, or maybe they just have a confused heart, and they're not really able to accept, as James chapter 1 would say, to receive the implanted Word of God. Well, that's how we're going to grow, when we receive it and it becomes a part of us. We know even, in the physical realm with having babies, there's a lot of seeds. But there's some people that have a hard time, no fault of their own again, of, the woman has the place to receive the seed and the man has the seed, and sometimes for years it doesn't really make the connection, does it? And, people try and try and try, but that's the same thing spiritually. That here we are, again, the parable is talking about we are the sowers of the seed. Jesus, when he was here, he did that. He sowed seed, but it didn't always make the connection. It didn't always take root. It didn't always get inside, and that's what the seed has to do spiritually. And so, the best thing for us as we remember this is not to get so upset and frustrated that people are not receiving. You know, we're trying to teach, we're trying to help people. It could be our friends, our coworkers, family members, even our own kids. We're trying to teach and plant seeds. And sometimes you just think it's just not going anywhere. You know, it's just we're throwing the seed, it's just bouncing off, and it doesn't really penetrate. But in order for life to happen, the seed has to penetrate. And so that's what we do. We pray for a soft heart. Even ourselves, sometimes we have to pray that we have an open heart, a soft heart when God's word comes to us. And that we're already Christians, but we still have some growing to do, and we want to have an open heart that we'd be able to hear the message. Kind of like Jesus' apostles, right? I mean, they were pretty committed in following him. They just didn't get a lot of stuff. They just didn't understand it. It just didn't really make a whole lot of sense because they weren't really ready to receive it. And so we want to be those kinds of people that have an open heart. We also want to be the people that share the seed with others, that they too can hear the word and to receive it and to be changed by it. Well, the next thing that happens after a little while is that you have a birth. And so here's the idea of being born again. It's just an infant. And so Jesus says, you know, being born again, this is essential. In John 3, he's talking to Nicodemus. We don't even know all the questions Nicodemus had for Jesus. He was pretty impressed by Jesus, of who he was. You know, we see you're a great teacher, you know, kind of a great prophet, the one who is to come. And Jesus begins right away of talking about the necessity of a new birth. You've got to be born again just to be able to be, well, hang on, to see the kingdom of heaven. And that's kind of what we talked about earlier, just to be able to see it, to understand it, to receive it. Never mind entering it, just to see it. Got to be born again. So he says, in order to see the kingdom, born again. And then, of course, Nicodemus in verse 4, it's not listed here, got all these questions. What in the world is he talking about? That just seems really weird, because I have already been born once physically, and hope you're not talking about that. That's kind of awkward. So, but he's like, no, I'm talking about spiritually. You have to be born again spiritual. Well, how would you do that? And so he goes on to explain, you must be born of water and the Spirit to enter the kingdom of heaven. To become a part, and that, again, we would say to be born into a new kingdom, just like many of you were born Americans, right? You were born here. This is where your citizenship is. Some of us other people are foreigners. Now, some people have actually, you know, transferred their citizenship. You know, they become American citizens by what's called, I don't know if they still call it naturalization. Nothing really natural about it, but you just sign up, pay some money, take a test. Well, then I guess they accept you, and then you're in, right? So that's kind of the idea that you're a citizen. You're a member of a new country, a new kingdom. You have a new king that you're going to be following. So he says you must be born of water and the Spirit. Now, I don't know if anybody knows this more than mothers. The birthing process is not always easy. Right? It can be challenging. It can be difficult. Right? And so becoming a Christian is not always easy. Right? When people really understand what's all involved. You know, it's kind of like the apostles sometimes. You know, they were following Jesus. They didn't really understand how difficult it was. I mean, just, you don't have to put up your hand, but I wonder how many ladies here are thinking, I've heard, you know, I've never had kids. I'm young. We just got married, but we're going to have kids one day. And I've heard it's bad, but can't be that bad. And then when you actually had a baby, well, maybe through the middle of the process, you're thinking, this is a whole lot worse than I ever thought it would ever be, right? For a lot of people, it's that way. It's just difficult. And sometimes it's that way with the apostles. Like Jesus would say, you know, if you're going to follow me, you're going to suffer. You're going to be persecuted. You are going to be hunted down. You are going to be thrown into prison, and you, for the most part, are going to be killed because you're a Christian. And it's not going to be a lovely death. And they're like, not a problem. We can do that. I don't know what they were thinking, but they weren't thinking what Jesus was saying, right? Because it was going to be difficult. Living a Christian life is challenging sometimes. Not all the time. But sometimes we got to count the cost and say, yeah, this is a sacrifice I've got to make. And it's not always going to be easy. So even the birthing process for someone to become a Christian is going to be difficult. Now, you think it's difficult for you to become a Christian. And again, we have no idea. Now, we can talk about it for a long time, but we have no idea how much pain God went through so that you could be in his family, right? Oh, well, Jesus died on the cross. You know, that's kind of sad. No, it was a whole lot more than that. The pain and suffering that Jesus went through, the physical stuff was, I would say, absolutely nothing. That pain was nothing. Zero. Compared to the pain he had of being separated from his Father. You and I can never understand that. Because the Father and the Son had a perfect relationship forever. It's always been. They've never been without each other. They've always, what we say, one. They were united in everything. In relationship, in thought, in love, in purpose. Everything was one with the Father and the Son. And now the Son is left to be alone. And sometimes we think about, wow, the pain that was going on there with Jesus, being separated from the Father. But if you're a parent, you may be a little bit familiar that there must have been a lot of pain with the Father in heaven. Here's my Son going through this without me. Because he took on the sin of mankind for all of us. And God could not have fellowship with his Son. A lot of pain in order that we could be born again. And now where does that leave us? That leaves us as young babies, born again. And so the next verse in 1 Peter chapter 2, where Peter says, we got to grow. You can't stay a baby forever. You can't stay an infant forever. But what do infants do? Well, they want to eat. They eat and they sleep and then they do other stuff that you got to take care of as a parent. That's it. That's all they do. But they have to eat. They've got to grow. And so he says, just like that baby just wants to eat, right? Usually, it's more than once a week if you've ever had a baby. Or maybe more than once a day. That baby is constantly desiring to eat. I want more milk. And I don't know why. I mean, I don't know if they've ever really gone through an interview with a 2-month-old or a 1-month-old to say, why do you like this? It's milk and it's warm. I mean, okay, a snack, but all the time? There's something in it that the baby just craves for it. Could you imagine if you have a baby, because some babies are like that, not thirsty, don't want milk. Like, it's got to have milk. So when the baby is longing for milk all the time, we think this is wonderful. That's how the baby's going to grow. We have to do that as Christians. So it's not natural, especially for a young Christian to say, I really want to grow in the Word. Now we do that. Like, has anybody here ever given up on eating? I don't think so. We all look pretty healthy, right? We don't say, well, I ate when I was a kid. I don't eat anymore, right? And I'm going to be a really strong physical person like I am a spiritual person, which means I eat once a week and have one meal, right? We think, well, I can come to church and that's it, and I'm done. Well, you don't treat your body that way. So he's saying we got to constantly grow in the Word. Sometimes that's all a young Christian can do. It's just like everything's brand new. They don't know much. Very dependent on other people, just like an infant would be. Got lots of questions. I don't understand this. What should I do here? I got this problem. I got this struggle. I'm being tempted. I've got people that don't like me now because I'm a Christian. I mean, everything's changing, and somebody's got to help them and be with them. So this is the infant process. But again, we don't want people to remain here forever. Some guy wrote Hebrews, unknown person, could have been Paul, wrote Hebrews, and in chapter 6 he says, you know, by this time in your spiritual life, you should be eating meat. Now, I want to throw potatoes in there too, because that's always good. Meat and potatoes. But you guys still like the milk. You guys are still like the babies, sure. You've been a Christian for 10 years, and you're still sucking on the baby bottle of the Bible. Grow up. Because you want to know something? This is what I'm thinking. Prove me wrong if you want to try it. Here's the new diet. Be on the milk diet. Just drink milk all the time. Right? That's not a healthy, balanced meal for adults. So he's saying you got to grow up. You got to be able to process a little bit more than just the basics and the fundamentals. You know, I just like reading John 3:16 over and over and over again. They even have a song that goes with it. Well, there's more to the Bible than just one verse, your favorite verse. So we've got to grow. So the infants, yes, they want to grow. But we've got to even mature beyond that. So eventually we got to be able to get up and get around a little bit. So we get to the toddler stage in our life. In Colossians chapter 2 and verse 19, I'm really enjoying the class on Sunday mornings here in the auditorium. Not at all because of the content, but simply because Dawn is taking like 3 years to get through one chapter. And that makes me feel a little bit better about my team. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that long. But we are, like this is, should I tell on you, Dawn? The second week we are in Colossians chapter 2, and we're not even at verse 19 yet. So anyway. But look what it says. Holding fast to the head from the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that comes from God. So yeah, we're supposed to be able to get up and walk around, to be able to run, to be able to flex a little bit of muscle. Like we're not exactly really coordinated because we're still working on it. We're still a fairly young Christian. But again, we can't baby new Christians forever, right? Eventually we've got to say, no, you've got to get up and exercise a little bit. You've got to do some stuff yourself. You've got to get out there. Yeah, and I know walking, to start with, is a little bit harder. Isn't life kind of strange that way? I mean, you're really little, and you're learning how to walk, and you don't have really good balance, and you feel a little bit weak, and you're a little bit wobbly, and you fall, and yet people are there still really encouraging you. Then later on in life, you know what I mean? You kind of get to the same point. You know, it's kind of hard to get up, hard to find your balance. You need some help. You know, you need some, you know, and that's the way life is sometimes. But a growing person means that they are able to be growing stronger, kind of being able to get around. We would say being a little more independent. Does anybody know a 4-year-old that's a little bit more independent than they were when they were 6 months? Yeah, they're getting around. They're doing what they want, and sometimes struggling with a lot of things in life. But he's saying we've got to grow. And so being a Christian is just not knowing, but it's growing. It's not just listening or learning, it is doing and acting, right? It's what we do. It's how we take what we've learned and then put it into practice, right? So again, a child now has it in his head, I want to walk. I think I know how to walk because for a while I've been watching everybody else walk. Maybe walking is not always that easy, but with a little bit of encouragement and some help and assistance, I'm going to get this thing down. And so this is the idea of continuing to grow as a Christian. But again, we need to continue to grow. We can't stay at 4 years old forever because there's more to do. There's more growth. There's something else that's expected. And again, that's kind of what was coming to my mind as we were looking at this Bible verse in 1 John that talks about the growth. I talk to you fathers, and I talk to you children, I talk to you young men. And they're at different stages of their spiritual life, but the idea is that they're all going to be growing no matter where they are. So in Acts chapter 17, verse 11 and 12, talks about the Bereans. I believe it's chapter 11. I did get the wrong verse. Chapter 17 is, no, maybe it is 17. Y'all are going to have to look that up for me. But anyway, so this is the Bereans, and, you know, they wanted to continue to grow. And so just like maybe a young child goes to school, is learning, they want to grow. Well, some of them want to grow. I remember when I was a child, I was the youngest, so my brother and sister were already in school. I was really sad. You know, I mean, I'm at home by myself, and they're at school, and they come home, they got some new friends, seem to be having a good time. I mean, they're learning something. I didn't know what that was all about, but, you know, they were going to school, and for the longest time, I just wanted to go to school. Then I got to school, and that only lasted like half a day. It's like, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. They're expecting me to learn some stuff. And the funny thing is, back then, now you may say, well, I didn't really learn a whole lot, which is probably true, but back then we didn't even have homework. Like, I don't even remember homework until high school. And of course, by then, I was never in the habit of doing homework, so didn't do it. That was another issue, another problem. But you know, you got to continue to learn and grow, right? Because how are you going to make it in life? Sometimes we don't even understand how all that works, right? I mean, how many times do you have to talk to your first grader and say, you really need to learn, you need to go to school, I know it's not always fun, you got to do your homework, you got to learn the lessons, you got to learn, you know, the words and the sentences and, you know. I mean, I was still learning the alphabet in 3rd grade, but that's another issue. But here, you got to learn, and then you got to learn math and all this, because you've got to progress through school, because if you don't do that, you're not going to get a job. And if you don't get a job, you're going to be living in this house forever. And no one wants that. Right? So you've got to progress. You've got to learn. You've got to grow. And that's the same thing with us as children. Right? Spiritual children. We continue to learn and grow and develop. And so it's through the studying of the scriptures. And the thing about the Bereans, it says they were eager to learn. They loved learning. They wanted to know. Because they knew how important it was. Like, we're not just talking about, you know, how you can get a better grade in school or how you can get a better job in your career or how you can maybe even change careers. It wasn't that. It was like, this has got to do with my relationship with God. It's really got to do with where I'm going to go when I die. You know, it's about a relationship. You know, I want to live with God in heaven. I don't want to live with the devil in hell. It's kind of an obvious choice, but if I want to go to heaven, I'm going to have to make sure that I know what God wants me to do. So they're really investing in this, taking this, we would say, education, this learning and the growing very seriously. Well, eventually you become a teenager. In Romans chapter 8, verse 14, therefore, just as you've received Christ as Lord, walk in him, having been firmly rooted, and now being built up in him, and established in your faith, just as you were instructed and overflowing with gratitude. So again, by the time you're a teenager, I'm thinking you have a little bit more understanding of the process of how this is going and what it's for, and how you apply things in your life. And you can see the practical ways. And this is not just talking, it's not really talking about knowing so much, because we are learning and growing in our knowledge, but it's living. How are we going to live this out? Now, if nothing else, I at least hope that most of us are here as we continue to grow, but that we can say, I can take a stand. I know where I'm at. I'm literally becoming a little more independent from all the people that have been spoon-feeding me the Word my whole life. Now I can start studying the Word for myself. I can start developing my own faith. I can't live forever on my parents' faith or on my Bible class teacher's faith. I've got to figure this out for myself and make my own decision. And maybe you've got some young people like that, right? That there's, wow, they seem to be becoming a lot more independent. They're kind of thinking without me, right? But that's good. They've got to do that eventually. So you're helping them to mature. And this is what we should be doing spiritually. So now we're actually involved in life, building relationships, figuring out how things work. And we do this from a spiritual viewpoint. We've got to grow up. We can't just stay young, but we continue to mature. I mean, it's kind of, we would say, the cycle of life. I mean, whether you want to get older or not, that's not something you choose. It kind of happens. Sometimes for some of us, it seems like it's happening too quickly. Right? Right? Because, I mean, when you're young, what do you say? How old are you? Well, I'm 6.5, but I'll be 7 soon. I've never heard somebody say that when they're older. How old are you? I'm 73 3/4. I'm really looking forward to 74, right? We don't say that. We say, well, I think I'm about 39, right? I feel like I'm 18.5, right? No, we grow. And that's what we're supposed to do. And spiritually, that's what we're supposed to do. So we got to see how this comes together. Well, after this, now this is kind of we would say this is a little bit more maturity. People that are kind of really understanding what spiritual growth looks like. So this kind of, we would say, maybe a young adulthood, maybe even after college or university, kind of starting your career. Because now what are you doing? You're figuring out not just how you can keep taking, because generally when you live at home, you could say, yeah, I do the dishes. But generally your parents are the ones supporting you, helping you, driving you, feeding you, right? So you're kind of taking. When I go to school, I'm generally taking. But you get to the point where you start giving. You get one of those things called a job. Apparently some people are very unfamiliar with the concept. But this is the idea that now you contribute to society. You'd be able to say, I've learned some things, and now I can help other people. Right? So I'm going to use, we would say, our spiritual gifts, our abilities, our talents, our opportunities to help others. Now, in the physical world, a lot of times that's done with physical things. Maybe we're able to do a trade. Maybe we're really able to use our intellect, our knowledge that we have. Maybe we're able to use our compassion and our empathy for people. So we're gifted in different areas, but people would use their gifts to make a significant contribution to society. Well, we do that in the church too. That now, I realize I'm not just supposed to be a taker in church. I'm supposed to be a giver. I'm supposed to be somebody who's willing to offer myself to others. How can I help others? How can I serve others? How can I bless others? How can I benefit? How can I help other people grow? How can I help? Maybe I got to take care of some of the baby Christians, or maybe the teen Christian. And again, I'm not talking about physical age, maybe, but I'm generally talking about spiritual. Where are they at? Well, I remember when I was there, some of the stuff I struggled with. And maybe if I just tell them that and say, I struggled with that too. You're not on your own. This is kind of common to a lot of people. We got questions. I don't get this, and why that happened. Well, let's get involved in our lives and point them back to God and show them in Scripture and pray with them. And we serve people. That's kind of what a mature Christian does. If you're still thinking about yourself and you've been a Christian for a while, grow up. If you've been a Christian for a short time, take some time, maybe, mature. But, there's nothing wrong with getting involved. I'm not saying you can't. And again, there's no timeline on this. It's like, well, I've only been a Christian a year. I guess I'm still an infant, so I'm just going to suck on the bottle. The baby bottle, I meant. But anyway, the thing is, you can mature as fast as you want. There's Christians in the New Testament, when they became Christians, it seems like they were serving almost right away. And they were helping others, and they were teaching, and, they're just using whatever they had. So I'm not saying you got to be stuck in each one of these areas for a couple of years each or something. We want to grow. That's the main point, to grow to the next level. So we want to use whatever gift God's given us, whatever gift we have. So what would we do with it? To help others, to serve others, to bless other people. And so we got to think in our life, where am I at this point? Now I know some people here. This is where you're at. Not here. I'm talking about here. Right? Having families, right? Isn't that natural that some people get married and then now they're having children of their own, right? And so what would we say that is? That's kind of like taking it to the next generation. We're helping other people that they too can have life, that they too can be born again. They too can have a relationship with God. They too can respond. So, and again, you don't have to wait any specific period of time. You just got to realize this responsibility we have to help other people as we plant seeds, right? That they can respond to the gospel like we've responded. Like somebody's taught us. Maybe it was our parents, or maybe it was a friend at work. Maybe it was something we read. But we learn and we grow, and then we teach other people that they also can be a part of God's family. They can be a part of His kingdom. They can be born again, right? So now we've got a new generation of Christians, people. And again, it's not necessarily just young people. Some people are born again in their 50s or 60s, 70s sometimes. But we need to be thinking about how we can encourage other people to make that kind of decision. And then lastly, I'm sure no one here can relate to this. This is kind of like the retirement stage. And it's not a stage when you're done work. It's kind of a stage where things change a little bit, right? So look what it says here in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. Paul says this to Timothy, who is actually still a young man. You then, my child, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So the idea is that when we do mature, we can instill what we know. We can train other people. And Paul saw his role with Timothy as a father's son. That's why he calls this young man his son in the faith, a son in the gospel. He invested his life. He was teaching him, discipling him. But the goal was not that it would end there, but it would continue. And so in physical life, sometimes you've got somebody in their 60s and they've got a child maybe in their 30s who has a little child that's maybe only 10. So you're able to teach the next generation how they can teach the next generation. And some people even hear great-grandparents where, it continues on. So it's really a generational thing. People passing on their faith, teaching their faith, demonstrating, living out their faith for people to see to multiple generations in your own family. But what if the family's the church? And you're supposed to do this on a spiritual level, right? How can we get involved? You can say, well, I'm 70 years old. How can I have any impact on teenagers? Well, I believe, might be wrong, that at one time you were a teenager. Well, they wouldn't understand, they are dealing with a whole lot of different, it's not that different. You had stuff you had to deal with, some questions and challenges, peer pressure, all that. Yeah, it's in a different form today, I get that. But, help people, encourage people by sharing our lives, by sharing the word, by sharing in prayer, trying to help others grow. And this is what Paul's telling Timothy. It passes on multiple generations. So, and I know some people here are grandparents or great-grandparents, and that's what you're thinking. How can I influence, even spiritually, my own family, physical family? But then there's also anyone can help strengthen the spiritual family, no matter where we are. Because a 4-year-old, can they do any good? Well, they can do a lot of bad. Because if you've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, who's the 2-year-old following? If you're a parent, it's not you, right? 2-year-old's following the 4-year-old. The 4-year-old says, let's do this, say this, try this, eat this, right? 2-year-old goes, okay. So what do we need to do? We need to say to the 4-year-old, listen, you got a lot of responsibility here. You may not want it, but it's yours. Because you got somebody looking at you, somebody following you, somebody imitating you, somebody's learning from you. You're only 4 years old. That's a lot of responsibility. Grow up. Like, it's life. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. I didn't do it this way, but the 2-year-old's looking to you. So don't mess up too much. Have a little fun, but don't go crazy. Does that make sense? Spiritually, we can do the same thing. You don't have to wait till you're, old and gray spiritually before you can start helping other people. Because even as a young Christian, people are looking at you. All right, so we're going to sing a song, Let Jesus Come Into Your Heart. A change of life, a decision to be made. If today you want to be born again and accept Christ, if you want to be baptized into Christ, you can do that today. Make that decision. Come and say, today is my day when I want to become a part of the family of God. I want to be a part of this kingdom, and I want to be blessed by God so I can be a blessing to others. Let's stand. We'll sing the song, and if we can help you in your Christian walk, let us know now.